Welcome back. It's time for another story. So when I started going on bigger trips with my dad, uh, he had already been he had already taken a number of trips to the Prophet River. It was an outfitter. Um, we would get flown in and would have our accommodations and meals taken care of. We would have access to horses, but it was not guided. And I, I first accompanied my dad and some of his friends in there when I was in my 30s. Admittedly, I was eager. I had good instincts as a young guy, but um, I had horrible buck fever, and the intensity was almost too much for me. I screwed up a lot of opportunities early, um, not just at the Prophet River when we went, but other places. Just nerves, and I'm sure many hunters can relate to the pressure you feel in the moment. Um, it's uh, it's almost undescribable how heavy that can be. Um, and yeah, it's quite distressing actually. You put so much effort and time into this, and it doesn't work. Anyway, odd. I thought it was odd. In retrospect, not odd. But when I started hunting with my children, um, the the pressure was different. I had this intense desire for them to succeed. I became the guide as opposed to the shooter, the hunter, and inevitably and quite quickly, I became a much better hunter. Uh, very grateful for that time. Plus, my kids did well because of of my getting better. So I'd been to the Prophet with my dad quite a few times, four or five, six times, and when my son Harley was 18, graduated from high school. I took him along. It was my dad and his friend Herb and Harley and myself. And so I had pumped up the tires of this place to Harley. Spoken of the amazing Prophet River and all the adventures and the animals that were everywhere and so on and so forth. And we got there. We we got our flight in, and it snowed that same evening, and it was not a lot of snow, 3 4 inches, but it was just barely freezing. So it was really wet and sloppy, and we were so eager to go the first day. I told the Moose Meadows story, and I wanted to take Harley there because there's moose everywhere there. And so we went. We didn't get all the way to the back. We got very, very wet, like wet through our rain gear, wet through our boots, wet. Yeah. We found a big bull moose track in the snow that was fresh, obviously. It just snowed. And we followed it for quite a ways, never saw the moose. Um, uh, got back, didn't see any elk that day. The next day, we made a trip to the next basin up the river and uh, another big hike up in the snow. Didn't see anything, saw some elk track, but saw no elk. Um, Calling, no callbacks. And at the end of the day, we dipped into the first basin that was across from camp, across the river, on the far upriver side of the basin. climbed up to a vantage point to look into the basin and saw some elk. They were far away, and it was getting far into the evening. We didn't have an option of pushing in on them then, but we saw one bull elk that we thought for sure was a 6x6. He looked like the dominant herd bull. There was maybe a dozen cows, and then off on the higher edge of the basin, there was what looked like another 5 or maybe 6 point bull, was bugling. He was just screaming his head off. And the herd bull, he was with the cows. He wasn't bugling. He was content to let the other satellite bull holler at him, but he had obviously already established what was what there. And then we were watching this and noticed another bull came past the satellite bull and very quietly, didn't bugle, didn't make a noise, and he looked odd. And when we looked closer at him, he was a 5x1. On one side, he had a spike that was as long as the 5-point antler, but it was just a single spike. And he walked all the way down through the cows, right past the herd bull, never lifted his head, never made eye contact, and walked right through. And so we were quite excited. We got back to camp. We made a plan for the next morning. My dad and Herb were going to enter into the basin from the vantage point where we had been watching the elk. We knew kind of how the elk traveled from basin to basin. The plan was that Harley and I would climb up and get into position on the ridge where the elk would cross over from one basin to the next and shoot that bull. That was the plan. Good plan. And so we got up in the morning. I've had done this a number of times with my dad, and I knew already that you can't be late. Like, my dad will push into something, and as soon as he sees the elk, he's not waiting. He's not like, yeah, you got to get there. And so we got up into the basin over, downriver, the one that we anticipated the elk would move into. And I heard another elk bugle as Harley and we tied up the horses. We were walking up. It was a slight distraction, maybe 20 minutes. And then we heard a moose bull grunt, which was another distraction for a few minutes. Like, you don't just run away from stuff that's right in front of you. Anyway, so by the time we got up to the ridge, I noticed the elk were probably 500 yards above us and had moved across the ridge already. So we were 20 minutes late. It was a real bummer. And although exciting now, because that morning was the first bright, clear morning, and it's like the whole countryside just came alive with critters. It was awesome. But definitely at 7:30, 8 o'clock, I felt like I'd screwed it up pretty good. So we dipped around and tried to do a loop. There was another, I wouldn't say a full basin, but a ravine just around the corner. I thought maybe we can catch them at that ravine. So we swung down around. It was a heavier bush. It was quite steep. There was still snow. Higher up, it was probably, like 8 inches of snow. And so in my mind, we were just trying to catch up and maybe create an opportunity or find an opportunity. And and so as we were climbing up this fairly steep ridge in the snow, we were having trouble with managing our temperature. We were sweating a lot, and you're trying to keep your optics, both your binoculars and your scope, clean, because the opportunity can come in a moment. And at one point, we were getting fairly close to where I thought maybe we would see something. And Harley, he was complaining, partly about the climb and partly about the snow and partly about just about the whole thing. It was a bit of a rough morning we were giving her, and he was 18 and not, not experienced in knowing what might come, and he dumped. He slipped and he fell face first into the snow, and with his gun in front of him. He had actually borrowed Uncle Jeff's 270, and so I was giving him grief about it. I'm like, you got to keep your weapon clean. And he's like, I just fell down. And I'm like, I know you fell down. We were just bickering back and forth, and I was giving him a hard time, and he was not happy. Nobody's happy when they fall face first into the snow. It was slippery. We were getting wet again, third day in a row. And as we were bickering amongst each other, to each other, an elk bugled. And I looked up the ridge and across the little ravine that we were following up, the ridge on the left side. On the opposite side, it wasn't a big ravine. It was a snotty, weedy ravine that had lots of crud in it, but it wasn't big. It was maybe 150 yards across. On the other side of the ravine, maybe 75 yards above us, it was like a Disney movie. He came out like the magnificent adult Bambi, like standing, and he bugled. It was like he was bugling at us. What are you doing here? And I looked up, and immediately it was 6x6. That was the herd bull, 100%. And Harley's frantically trying to clean the snow out of his scope, and he's like, "What should I do?" I'm like, "Take your pack off." And because it was quite steep, a freehand shot would have been difficult. It was probably a 200-yard shot. And so he got his pack off, got his gun on top of his pack, and settled in. And I'm like, "Shoot him." And he took a shot, and nothing happened. It was like, for a moment, that seemed like it was a long moment, but it was probably like a second or two. Everything was just quiet. And the elk was looking at us, and we were looking at him, and we were looking at each other, and nothing happened. And I said, "You missed." He's like, "Yeah, what should I do?" I said, You should reload your gun and shoot again is what you should do." And such an obvious answer, but it was pretty intense. And so he turned the bolt, lined up, and the second shot, he drilled him. And there was some weedy alder that had grown up behind the elk. He got hit. He wheeled up, spun around about 180, and plowed down into this weedy alder that was maybe 20 feet high. And he was gone. And so we knew he'd been hit. And so we made our way across the ravine. It took us about a half an hour to cover that 200 yards. Got to where he'd been hit. Didn't see any blood. Saw his tracks. And just as we were going to enter into the alders, we hear another elk bugle. And we looked back, and just across the ravine, like not maybe 100 yards from us, is the satellite bull. And he had been following the herd bull, as we had seen a day earlier, and he was still screaming. He was screaming, but the wind had changed now. Initially, when we shot, the wind was coming at us. Now we were on the other side of the ravine, and the wind was at our back going towards the elk. So as soon as we kind of made contact with one another, the satellite bull and us, he smelled us. But he was so hot and bothered that as soon as I called to him, he was back. And so Harley said, I'm going to go look for the other elk. You figure this out, and if he's legal, you take care of that, and then we'll meet up. That was the plan. Cool. So I couldn't see the sixth point. I thought it was the sixth, but I wasn't sure. And so he was getting more and more, the satellite bull was getting more and more leery and started to move away, but bugling. And I'd bugle and he'd bugle. And it was just this back and forth, but with him moving away from me. He, like I said, started at 100, maybe under 100 yards. And then I realized, if I'm going to shoot, I got to shoot. Either he's legal or he's not legal. And I was quite certain he was. And finally, he was at over 300, over 350. He was at the final point, just under 400 yards. And I'm like, okay, I had a good rest. I got to do this. And so I shot. I had my 325. It was a good hit. He didn't take a step. He flipped upside down. I actually saw his legs up in the air like this. So he flipped over onto his back, and he was done right there. So okay, he's down. So then I followed Harley's tracks in the snow, and he was several hundred yards away. The elk had plowed down through the alders downhill. And we did find a little blood at the end. It was odd that there wasn't more blood because it was a lung shot, and the elk was dead. He was stone cold dead when we found him. Nice 6-point bull, super exciting, and so now we had 2 elk bulls down, and that happened like in a half an hour, and so we pictures and celebrated a little bit, had a little coffee break, and then we butchered up the elk. And Harley and I walked out with that elk. And you think, 2 guys can't carry a full elk. Well, no, we can't, but we can drag him. In the snow, in the game bags, it actually worked pretty well. So we slowly walked out with each dragging 2 quarters, and then we had the loose meat in our packs, and we just kind of puttered along and worked our way back to the ravine, down through the ravine, found a game trail through, and came up the other side, and located my bull, which was a 5x6, barely, but he was, and so we were just gonna, we had just taken a couple of pictures of my bull, and we're going to start butchering there. We had already radioed the outfitter, and he was on his way up with a crew of horses. And before we could, I didn't have my knife out or anything yet. We actually had down the ridge at the bottom of the ravine, we saw a moose bull. I'm presuming it was a moose bull I'd heard earlier that morning, grunting and walking across. Now, my optics, everything was soaking wet, and I picked up the binoculars to see if he was a legal 3 on the brow tine. I couldn't see. It was just fuzzy, and so Harley, I was a little befuddled in that moment. I didn't know quite what to do, and Harley suggested, why don't you call him? I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I don't know why I didn't think of that. So I started cow calling at this bull, and immediately he turned, and he was maybe 300 yards away from us. He immediately turned. Um, he had just crossed that little ravine, turned, came up the hill. He entered into the bush and came up the ravine on the other side of the ravine. And I kept calling. I could hear him grunting, and he popped out on the other side of the ravine, straight across from us, not 100 yards away. And I told Hardy, shoot him. You better shoot him. And so he took a shot. The bull wheeled around. He took another shot, and down he went. And I distinctly recall the outfitter radioing us a minute after the second shot, saying, "Len, what did you do?" And he'd been there before when we shot 4 moose in one morning, and he knew we had 2 elk bulls down. What are you shooting at? So I said, well, we actually shot a bull moose too. So to Nick's credit, he did not give us a hard time about it, although I don't imagine he was super thrilled in that moment. And so the bull was down 100 yards from us, but it was across this snotty ravine. So we went across. We gutted my elk, then we went across to the moose, and we gutted that animal. Took some pictures. The adrenaline is ebbing off pretty good. Like now, it's just a whole pile of work, and so then we had the first elk quartered up already, and the next morning, we got about an elk and a half out with the horses that day. The next morning we came back. It had frozen pretty good. Got to my elk. There was grizzly prints everywhere. There was a sow with triplet cubs, little ones. So I knew it was her because of the little bear prints that were all over. And they had cleaned up the guts pretty good and buried my elk, which was only half there, but we had left the quarters on, assuming that maybe the bears would visit and it would be more difficult for her to leave with the whole animal than it would be to leave with the quarter. In which we were correct. It was a good call. And so we finished quartering up that animal and then worked our way through the ravine up to the moose. We were pretty loud, trying to do the right thing with the bears, and built a fire. And the moose had fallen. There was an open hillside below it for maybe 100 yards. And then it got into thicker bush where you couldn't see. But it had fallen just in a little ring of trees on the uphill side of it. So I couldn't see down the hill while I was working on the moose. So I had instructed Harley to get up just up a little bit so he could see down the hill. And there was moose prints moose prints. Yes, moose prints where the moose was, of course. Bear prints. The sow and the cubs had been on the moose kill as well. And so I said, I know what the rules are about bears, and we weren't allowed to kill a grizzly, and I had no desire to kill a grizzly, but I'm there with my 18-year-old son, and I'm not entertaining a bear encounter, and I'm not going to let the bear get to 10 feet before we say that's close enough. So I said, if the bear sees you and continues to come, you start shooting. I don't care if it's 10 yards away or 80 yards away. Like, we're not waiting for this thing to be on us before we're going to defend ourselves. And I will take responsibility for that. And sure enough, I made 20 minutes, half an hour in. I'm just been quiet for a few minutes now because I'm working. I'm gutting, quartering the animal, and we hear a growl, and I jumped up, and as I'm going for my gun, Harley looks at me and says, "It's the grizzly," and he can see it. And so by the time I got up to him, the grizzly had already turned, but the grizzly had come up, saw Harley, saw me scrambling up to get beside Harley, turned, and went back into the bush. Perfect. She worked all the way, and she didn't smell us. That was the thing. It was in the morning, and the thermals were coming, were starting to come up the hill, and so even the fire, all that, she didn't smell us, she didn't hear us, and when she did realize we were there, she made a big loop through the bush until she got around us, and so she could figure out what was going on, and then she buggered off. Perfect bear encounter. And we worked as quickly as we could. We got the quarters and the loose meat out of there, and we turned everything over to Mama and her cubs. You can have the rest. We bless you with that. And so we got that back over to the same way we moved the elk. We moved the moose, although that took a little longer because it's a little bit bigger, a lot bigger. And the second day we got another animal and a half, all the rest out, and everything got out safely. And we had 2 bulls and a bull to boot. It was a pretty incredible morning. Harley got to experience the Prophet River as an adventure in the same way that we had, the stories had been told to him, and I was thrilled that it worked out the way that it did for him. Both Herb and the cows were open then too, cow elk, and both Herb and my dad got a cow elk, so everybody went home with an animal. It was a really good trip, and I enjoyed being there, not just because we had such a great adventure, but because I could share that time with both Harley and my dad together. It was a very special trip for me. And so I hope that I'm able to do that as my dad did with my grandson. I hope I can do that with my grandsons one day as well. 2 bulls and a bull to boot. Hope you enjoy, boys. Cheers.